I think you're live on Facebook now.
Yes, it's fine now.
Yeah.
Welcome everybody to another episode of our webinar series. Today we are joined by Member of Parliament in Ghana, Comrade Ras Mubarak. We love him so much here in South Africa. Comrade Ras Mubarak, how are you?
Ali, greetings from Akosombo here in Ghana. Akosombo is about 2 hours drive from Accra, and it's one of those places that Nkrumah, developed. And Nkrumah is our first president. This area is where we have the hydroelectricity dam at. And behind me, I don't know whether it's visible enough. You can see a dam, the Akosombo dam behind me. I'm doing very well. Thank you very much. And sorry about the mix-up with
no problem.
With
no
the time.
Problem. No problem at all. If I didn't know better, I think that introduction is an invitation to come there.
Absolutely. I mean, it's an awesome place.
We'll definitely make some time to come to Ghana. I'm sure the audience also would. After that introduction, we'll come and check if there is a dam.
Absolutely.
Right.
I think. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Let's get into it, Comrade Ras Mubarak. And before we start, for those who are not familiar with us, we are Africa for Palestine, a human rights solidarity organization primarily concerned with human rights violations done by the Israeli apartheid regime against Palestinians. We do work across the African continent, raising awareness and pushing back the Israeli influence in the continent. We do our work with several civil society organizations in the continent, trade unions movements, political parties, church movements, mosque movements, across different religions, across different political parties, and for many other organizations like ourselves that identify with our cause. Today we have Comrade Ras Mubarak, like I said, a member of parliament in Ghana. We're going to talk about Ghana and Palestine, the historical allies, and currently the situation in Ghana with regards to solidarity with Palestine. Comrade Ras Mubarak, thank you for joining us, and tell us about yourself, tell us about the work that you do.
Okay, so my name is Ras Mubarak, Member of Parliament. My constituency is in the north of Ghana. It's called Kumbungu. And I serve on Parliament's Communications Committee and the Public Accounts Committee of Parliament. And before politics, I served in government as the head of the Youth Authority of Ghana under the Ministry of Youth and Sports. And hither to that, I was a broadcast journalist. So in a nutshell, that is Ras Mubarak. But I've been actively involved in the solidarity movement for quite some time, even during my radio days a little over a decade or so ago, when we would use editorials, and epilogues on radio to call for justice for not just Palestine, but wherever there were vestiges of injustice.
Thank you. You clearly are a man of many talents.
Thank you.
Comrade Ras, for the audience, for those who are not aware, Ghana was the first country in the African continent to gain its hard-fought independence from British colonial rule. Would you say that Ghana is an example to many other countries in the African continent on the liberation struggle per se, and does that particular legacy, does that particular history still influence Ghana's foreign policy?
So let me say that Ghanaians, and indeed many of our brothers and sisters across the African continent, particularly from West Africa and parts of East Africa, had gone through slavery, right? And the era and history of slavery strengthened us to really struggle for our own liberation. So we had colonization after slavery, and people like Nkrumah, people like Nyerere, people like Uhuru Kenyatta of Kenya, Julius Nyerere, were at the forefront of the liberation struggle for many countries in Africa. And indeed, Ghana being the first country of the Sahara to attain independence, we were better placed to, if you like, champion the Pan-African agenda. And the Pan-African agenda, beyond bringing Africans together and working for the African agenda, was also to give a voice to places and nations that had challenges, and what we did greatly was to hold our brothers and sisters from the other parts of the continent. So, for instance, you had people like the late comrade Robert Mugabe, who had a Ghanaian wife, he had a Ghanaian passport. We had supported a lot of South Africans, a lot of Tanzanians, a lot of Kenyans, and people from all over the continent who were struggling for their own liberation. Now, that set the tone for Africa's shedding of any vestiges of colonization, right? But unfortunately, Nkrumah, as you may be aware, was overthrown in February of 1966, which actually, derailed our forward move, which derailed the Pan-African agenda. Because Kwame Nkrumah, what he did was wholly for a one African continent that is interested in the African agenda. Unfortunately, even though post Kwame Nkrumah, we still describe, and this is to answer your question, we still describe ourselves in terms of foreign policy as non-aligned, so we neither, as Kwame Nkrumah famously said, we neither faced east nor west, we faced forward, and that has been the driving principle of Africa. We face forward as far as our foreign policy is concerned. In respect of the Palestinian agenda, you would know, and indeed many of our audiences and viewers would know that Kwame Nkrumah was vociferous in his support for our brothers and sisters in Palestine. He had publicly criticized Israel and the rest of it. Sadly, we are not seeing that level of confidence in African heads of state. We are not seeing that level of bluntness in African nations. Even here in Ghana, for instance, there are many members of parliament and politicians from all sides of the political divide who would not publicly criticize Israel. And for me, that is most unfortunate. It's like saying it is okay to keep children in prison. It is like saying it is okay to rape women. It is like saying it's okay to perpetuate apartheid. It's like saying it's okay, to encourage torture, because that's exactly, what the gangster state of Israel is doing, and as disappointing as it is, we're beginning to see a young crop of Africans, people like myself, yourself, my sister Suraya, and many others who are restless about the Palestinian issue and about issues in South America and other places where the rights of people are abused greatly, by these colonial powers.
It's interesting that you bring up the number of countries and surely African leaders who were greatly assisted by Ghana during Kwame Nkrumah's time. For viewers who don't know, there was a movement in Ghana called the Ghana National Committee Against Apartheid. It was formed around 1967.
67, absolutely.
Yeah, and the organization kept alive an anti-apartheid tradition in Ghana, even when the government held talks and dialogues with the apartheid government. Does this kind of speak to the moral fiber of Ghanaians, that even though some leaders of Ghana might be swerving in a different direction, Ghanaians themselves anti-oppression and in the particular case of Africa were anti-apartheid?
So it is inherent in the Ghanaian be against anything that is oppressive in nature. Looking at our own history, our own struggle for independence, our own struggle for our liberation. Unfortunately, post Kwame Nkrumah, you even saw in '67, and '67 it was the government of Prime Minister Buzia of Ghana. You saw in '67 the Aliens Compliance Act, an act of Parliament that sought to drive out non-Ghanaians from Ghana, especially Nigerians. Can you believe the absurdity that this had actually happened in Kwame Nkrumah's Ghana, where Africans, were sent packing to their respective countries because some people claimed that these Africans who are but for the borders that the colonialists had created could easily be described as Ghanaians or Togolese or Cameroonians or South Africans, But these things happened, and it's a most unfortunate chapter in our history, as far as our solidarity with the Palestinian people is concerned, as far as our solidarity with South Africa is concerned, as far as our solidarity with all oppressed people of the world is concerned. For a country like Ghana, which was at the forefront of the liberation struggle, to be seen to have a rapprochement, with the apartheid regime of South Africa, that was a dark moment in our history. It blotted, it was like a stain on the conscience of Ghanaians, and it's a period we don't want to remember, especially these things coming at the heel of what President Nkrumah had done, not just for our country, Ghana, but for the rest of the African continent. I mean, supporting apartheid is something that not just Ghanaians, but Africans should not and must not countenance, but unfortunately it had happened. And it also brought about some level of drawback in the movement, because what the administration in '66, after the overthrow of Kwame Nkrumah, did was to whitewash, if you like, any historical record of Kwame Nkrumah. So, for instance, books that were authored either by Kwame Nkrumah or by people about Kwame Nkrumah and the Pan-African movement, sadly, were all banned in Ghana, and that's how a backward step we had taken, as far as our position, because Ghana had played a lead role. I mean, the first country, in sub-Saharan Africa to attain independence, one of the countries that gave a lot of our resources, to our brothers and sisters, whether in Mozambique, in South Africa, in Namibia, and the rest of it. And that is why in many of these African countries, Ghana is still held so high in esteem, But hey, we are in 2020. The youth are restless about supporting things that would promote and extol the image of Ghana globally. And I'm sure if we kept on at it, surely it is a difficult struggle, in the face of what Israel is doing, not just in Ghana, but on the continent of Africa, pumping in a lot of resources, deceiving people that they are in to help, when we know that they're actually doing all of these things to help nations in Africa in line. I remember my own confrontation with the then ambassador of Israel to Ghana, when he had ignorantly said on public radio that Ghana should never make the mistake we had made by his terms for voting against a resolution, for voting against Israel at a resolution, on a resolution at the United Nations. It wasn't in the place of an ambassador to tell Ghana how or what Ghana needed to do as far as human rights resolutions were concerned. But these things had happened. And I'm very happy. I'm happy at Ghana's, if you look at Ghana's record of voting at the UN on issues of human rights, especially relating to Palestine, it's quite an exciting record. You sadly see countries such as Togo either vote against or abstain, from the vote. And abstaining from the vote at the UN is playing subservience, to these slave masters, to these colonialists who still want to keep us in shackles and chains, And I'm happy that in spite of the difficulties that we have had over the last 45 years or so, successive governments have at least recognized that indeed we need to be in solidarity with the people of Palestine and the people of other countries who are undergoing oppression. I mean, we were one of the earliest to even recognize the state of to recognize the Republic of Cuba, and have a Cuban embassy in Ghana and support Cuba to the best of our ability, at the chagrin of countries such as the United States of America and Britain, and what we need currently on the African continent is courageous leaders, whether at the gubernatorial level or at the lowest level. We need a vibrant leadership on the African continent to stand up to some of these things that have not been in the interest of the African continent. Because I see Israelis' continued oppression of our people, as a perpetuation of colonization. And if you're not careful, if you don't call it out for what it is, what Israel is doing is violating the human rights of Palestinians. The Palestinian issue has nothing, as far as I'm concerned, to do with religion. What they are doing is egregiously violating the rights of the Palestinian people. And to think that in 2020, in spite of all the progress that nations of the world have achieved or attained, that Israel can brazenly say that it wants to further annex Palestinian territory actually is one of the stupidest things that could happen. And I don't think we should encourage or we should even entertain it.
Interesting that you mentioned, unfortunately, that Kwame Nkrumah's legacy is slowly and sometimes deliberately in Ghana trying to get whitewashed. And for our audience who perhaps don't know, Kwame Nkrumah was a very ardent critic of Israel and a supporter of the Palestinian cause. Many
Absolutely.
like even the former president of Ghana,
Jerry Rawlings.
Jerry Rawlings, yes. So we have something similar in South Africa as well, that is being done with Nelson Mandela, that the Zionist Israeli lobby want to take him away from us. They want to make him this other person who he was not, a supporter of peace, of negotiations, and so on.
Yeah,
when he was a very good supporter of Palestine, he was very unambiguous in his support for Palestine. Are there attempts, perhaps, from the progressives in Ghana to preserve that legacy and history of Kwame Nkrumah, for the young people also in Ghana, in the African continent, to say that this is Kwame Nkrumah and this is what he represented on Palestine, on South Africa, on Pan-Africanism, and many other issues?
There have been attempts, particularly by the current administration, which is right of center, to promote Prime Minister Buzia. And Prime Minister Buzia, for listeners who are not familiar with the history of Ghana, even though was one of the allies of Kwame Nkrumah, but they were more gradualists in terms of our attainments of independence. So there have been that attempts to even say, look, Kwame Nkrumah is not the founder of Ghana, and there have been attempts to, give credit to some other people who, in diverse ways, also made contributions. It's sad. I've listened to the South African narrative of Israel's attempt to say that, look, the Palestinians should look up to Nelson Mandela and act in a manner that Nelson Mandela acted. There was never a question in South Africa about annexing South African land and giving it to the Africans and the Europeans who had settled in South Africa. There was never that question. So the two situations are completely different. And I'm sure if South Africa had been faced with the kind of situation that the Palestinians face, which is Israel, a creation of Britain, so you had Britain that appropriated on itself authority to determine where Jews after the World War should be settled, okay? And without consultation with the Palestinian people, without any consultation. So they were just brought in to settle in today's current state of Israel and Palestine. And if you look at the amount of land they had when they were brought in, to the amount of land they have stolen now, or territory they have stolen, clearly it's staggering. And South Africa never was faced with, okay, blacks should have this portion of the land and we the whites would have, that portion of the land. I think that distinction has to be made. So in as much as what is happening in the state, or to our brothers and sisters in Palestine, is apartheid, in as much as it is comparable to what had happened in South Africa, the dynamics are not entirely the same in view of the nitty-gritties of, what is happening on the ground. There was never a question of all the people should move out of, this land, okay, and have an independent state within South Africa. So I'm not sure we ever, and I stand to be corrected, I'm not sure we ever had in South Africa a situation where the whites argued that they're going to divide the land and take a portion of it. I mean, even though they had restricted some areas as only white-only areas, but they still laid claim, laid claim to the whole of South Africa. Okay? And in as much as they respected the rights of South Africans to live in certain areas, we have a situation in Palestine where Israel is even refusing to recognize Palestine as a state. Right? In spite of the fact that Palestine has its embassies in places like South Africa, in places like Ghana and elsewhere, Israel is refusing to recognize Palestine as a state. I mean, look at the blockade in Gaza. That is the biggest open prison in the world. And to think that all of these things have happened and leaders of the world have acquiesced, and kept quiet and kept mute over these things is most sad. And that is why I'm very excited about the energy. I mean, we were Steve Biko's age, when they were at the forefront of the liberation struggle. And it's understandably so that when people are in their 20s, 30s, and early 40s, they are restless to get results and have things done. Probably our senior citizens on the continent of Africa are more of gradualists because you don't see the firebrand nature of doing things that people like Nkrumah exhibited in their time. You don't see that. You don't see the kind of things that comrades Robert Mugabe did in then Rhodesia, at his prime. You don't see that kind of vibrancy on the continent of Africa. And that is largely because of a fear that the West might punish these African countries if they were to openly go after the state of Israel. And I think that's the point we need to be getting to, to be calling out Israel for what it is. Israel is a terrorist nation. Israel is a gangster state. Israel is perpetuating apartheid. And the way forward in dealing with a country that has no respect for human rights is to boycott them, is to sanction them, and is to diversify investment.
Yes, thank you very much for that. And I might add that many other leaders of South Africa who participated in the anti-apartheid struggle, others who were jailed, like former state president Ras Mubarak, had a chance to go to Israel. And when they came back, they said, you know what, apartheid was a playground compared to what Israel is doing. It's,
Absolutely.
far much worse than apartheid South Africa. So I agree with you fundamentally that Israel is far much worse than what happened in South Africa. We've seen in the recent past deliberate, open, and it's not a secret, open buying of support in the African continent. You mentioned Togo, that Israel uses money to buy support, just like in Togo. How can we effectively deal with that? How can we stop that? And I think also it's important to name and shame these leaders, just like in Togo. But how do we effectively stop that? How do we effectively stop Israel's influence in buying of support in the continent?
So we need a lot of activism. Fortunately for us today, we've got, new media, on our side, whereas in the past you would have had to struggle to get, a space either on state broadcasting corporations or, state newspapers, then now, we have access to all manner of new media. And I think we need to take full advantage of it and educate the people. There's a lot of ignorance. I was listening to the Israeli ambassador to the UN on the BBC the other day, and he spoke about the fact that it is God who had given them the land, and for that matter, they inherently own that land. I mean, it's rubbish. This is something that can't stand in any international law, even in God's law. That a group of people who cannot even be described as Israelites, because the people in current state, in current place, Israel, cannot even be described as the proper Israelites. Okay, Netanyahu doesn't keep the Sabbath holy. He doesn't wear the kippah. Okay, he doesn't do things that are that are customary things in Judaism. Okay, so they can't call themselves the true Israelites, and we know that they are phony. We know that they are fraudulent. And that is why we need to lay bare the facts. And the facts are that what Israel is doing is against international law, resolution upon resolution. The United Nations, which sadly has not had much of a teeth to bite itself, had passed resolutions. And again, it brings me to a very passionate issue I have with the composition of the Security Council. Africa obviously should have a place in the Security Council. Latin America obviously should have a place in the Security Council. Asia should have a place in the Security Council. Okay, and we should have instances where, if these, even though they get to the countries within Africa and Europe and Asia and elsewhere, get on the Security Council on a rotational basis, but they are not permanent members of the Security Council. Okay, so if some members are going to be permanent members of the Security Council, then obviously we would have to give permanent status. I mean, South Africa is obviously a giant in Africa. South Africa can take its rightful place on behalf of the rest of the countries of Africa on the Security Council, and that would bring a more fairer, a more just way as doing things at the global level.
Thanks for that. As a lawmaker yourself, do you think that there are laws that African countries can take to, as a show of active solidarity, not just rhetoric, not just speaking on the issue of Palestine, but are the laws that lawmakers can pass in their respective parliaments as a show of solidarity?
So a lot of these parliaments are toothless bulldogs. Okay, they don't bite. You saw how Israel from time to time would assemble speakers of parliament from Africa to go for conferences in Israel, and God knows what happens when they return. I remember my own Speaker of Parliament, the Right Honorable Professor Michael Quay, upon one of such trips, declare support for Israel. I had to, take him on publicly, and this is widely available in print on the internet. And indeed, he was reprimanded by the presidency that issues of foreign policy were the exclusive preserve of the executive arm of government. So you have in Africa where speakers themselves, would block any debate on the Palestinian issue and the rest of it, where they are already showing biases. So it makes passing resolutions and acts in Parliament a bit challenging, okay? And what we probably need to be focusing on is to get more like-minded people like us in Parliament, in public office, so that at least we can bring about that change. I'm probably the only visible, outspoken critic of Israel in the Ghanaian Parliament, and even though I don't mind my Lone Ranger status, I'm hoping that I know for a fact that I'm on the right side of history, and that when all is said and done, history would judge me rightly for standing with the oppressed people of Palestine. Okay, so what we need to do, instead of just organizing demonstrations and issuing press releases and showing solidarity through press statements and the rest of it, would be, as Haile Selassie said, Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia said, is to organize, is to centralize and organize. Okay, as Marcus Garvey said, is to centralize and organize. We seem to be very fragmented. We're like a ragtag army, okay, going into battle against states that are hell-bent on perpetuating some form of colonization against our people. I mean, you see the economic crimes, Europe and America perpetrate on our people. You see the theft of our resources and the rest of it. And we need to say that, look, we have to not just protect our countries, but also give support, just like our forefathers give support, to people who are suffering from elsewhere in the world. We need to stand strong and be in solidarity with countries such as Palestine, and ensure that the oppression ceases.
Yes. I'm going back to that characterization of Israel. You've said, I've noticed some words here that I'm going to use myself in the future, that Israeli leaders are phony, they are fraudulent, it's a gangster state, it's a terrorist state. Many also have said it's an apartheid state. For viewers and audience, Comrade Ras was going to Palestine, and for just to give context, Israel, as a terrorist state, like Comrade Ras says, controls the sea, the land borders, and the air of Palestine. So if you want to go to Palestine to be, it's the Israelis that decide if you want to get in or not. That's the level of state terrorism that they have. So Comrade Ras, if I'm not mistaken, 2 years ago, was going to Palestine, and at the airport, if I'm not mistaken, was deported back to Ghana. Tell us about that experience.
Okay, so I was going to Palestine at the invitation of President Mahmoud Abbas. I was going there through the Allenby border. So I had transited in Jordan, and was going by road through the Allenby border. And even though a holder of diplomatic passport, I mean, I had known for a fact that Israel had denied other outspoken critics of Israel entry, diplomats and non-diplomats alike. There was a mayor, I think in Ireland, who was denied entry, and the rest of it. So it wasn't something I did not expect. I was going there fully aware that, anything was possible, right? But their attitude was so disrespectful, and again, it tells you that they have zero respect for international laws. It tells you that they have zero respect for international protocols. Members of parliament, mayors, and high-level government officials make attempts to go to Palestine to see what is actually happening on the ground. And Israel, because it wants to hide things, decide that I wouldn't let A or B or C go to Palestine. I'm unapologetic about my criticism of the gangster state of Israel, and so yeah, they refused, and I'd had to address a conference I was attending, from Jordan, so it wasn't by air, it was by land, and it was most unfortunate, and it further exposed them for the phony country that they are. Because every now and then, pay attention, whenever you hear an Israeli official speak, they rattle on about Israel being the only democracy in the Middle East. That is not true. That is a farce. Okay, even Israelis within Israel are kept under subjugation. Newspapers that are critical of the government are shut down. People are beaten up. Recently you saw how they killed a young boy who was a person with disability. In Palestine, in Israel, right within the Israeli society. Acts of human rights violations are happening. Acts of corruption, all manner of things are happening. They are keeping innocent Palestinian men, women, and children in their prisons. They are stealing other countries' passports. They are assassinating, not just Palestinian politicians, but politicians they do not like in places like Dubai and the rest of it. We need to call them out. They are a terrorist state. Israel is not a democracy as they seek to claim, to be the only democracy in the Middle East. They are not. And the fact that other countries are not organizing elections every 4 or 5 years does not mean they are not adhering to democratic tenets. What Israel is doing is worse than what autocrats do. Okay? And calling them out, for me, I'm even tired of calling them out. I think we need action. And the action we need is to encourage our governments, is to encourage our ordinary citizens to boycott Israel, to isolate Israel, to bring the Israeli economy to its knees. That is what we need to be doing. Because if persuasion fails, what is it that the Palestinians have not done in terms of appeasement? They've been appeasing the Israelis all this while, and Israel continues to annex. Israel continues to, keep a blockade on Gaza. Israel continues to block aid from coming into Palestine. They continue to withhold the salaries of Palestinian workers. Terrible things are happening on the ground. Okay? And if a country is doing this, a country that did not own the land in the first place, that are claiming, a country that is claiming, whose sole claim to the land is biblical. That is how absurd the argument over ownership of the Palestinian land is. And ordinary citizens can take part. And the things that we can do as ordinary citizens of the world, not just Africans, not just Asians, Europeans, but Americans, but, Australians and everybody else, is to boycott Israel. Anything that is made from Israel must be boycotted. Okay? Our governments have to ensure that they are sanctioning Israel. And our companies in our respective countries that are doing business with Israel would have to de-invest, they would have to divest. And I'm so excited that South Africa scaled down its operations in Tel Aviv recently. I think that is the way to go. All countries within Africa, in solidarity with the oppressed people of Palestine, have to scale down. I had even pushed for the recall of our ambassador, Hananyako, from Tel Aviv. Unfortunately, the government didn't think it was the right decision. But that is where I want to see things. That is where I want to see Africa go. Okay, to take decisive action, to be bold enough. I'm happy even though it comes at the heels of so many deaths. South Africa has experienced what apartheid is. And so South Africa courageously can call out Israel for what it is. Government, you hear South African government officials calling out Israel for what they are. Many countries in Africa have elected officials and non-elected officials who can't even do half what South Africa is doing. So I'm appreciative of the leadership that South Africa is providing in this direction, even though I feel that a lot more can be done, to provide impetus, to give traction for the liberation struggle. And the only language now, after all the attempts to bring Israel, why did Israel decide not to, go with the Oslo Accord? Why did they decide to take out Yitzhak Rabin? Because we were close to securing a lasting solution and peace. We were close to securing a two-state solution, but they never wanted peace in the first place. And that is how come since Rabin and after the failure of the Oslo Accord, nothing seriously has happened as far as moving the process forward is concerned. That is why all of us need to get into full gear. Anything that is made from Israel, any companies that are doing businesses with Israel, we need to isolate and boycott them.
Interesting that you say that. We know for a fact, and this is a fact in South Africa, in Africa, and in the world, that campaigns like the boycott, divestment, and sanctions worked in South Africa. South Africa was isolated, and even in the African continent, it was taboo for you as an African leader to associate yourself with South African leaders. What would you say to our audience, and more especially to African young people in the continent, on how to actively participate in the solidarity movement? People are watching, people at home. What would you say to them that this is what you would do to effectively show your support?
So first of all, the BDS movement, is visible. The BDS movement is global. BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanction movement is visible. On social media where young people are. There's a Twitter account for BDS. There's a Instagram account for BDS, and I think on Facebook. They can go on these, and they have a website. They can go on these pages and see the list of companies that are perpetuating apartheid. Because it's not just about Israel, but there has to be punishment for bad behavior. That is the only way to go. There has to be punishment for bad behavior. If Israel is behaving badly, if Israel is acting in a manner that does not conform with standards of the world, we need to punish them. And as I've said time and again, Israel is a rogue state. So young people, particularly Twitter generation, Instagram generation, Facebook generation, we have to encourage them to get involved in the movement, because now today it is Palestine. They've messed up Venezuela already, okay, and they still have intentions of messing up some African countries that do not agree with them. They've messed up Libya, okay. They've messed up Libya. I mean, messed up so many countries. And so if we do not take things into our own hands and be decisive about how disgusted we are at Israel's behavior, they will continue to get emboldened, and they would continue to perpetuate apartheid, and that is why I think I don't encourage the taking up of arms. It's not a solution. It would never be the solution, but cripple the Israeli economy. I have nothing personal against Israelis, okay? But if they keep on electing governments who would not want peace, ultimately, in any act of war, ultimately, they have a duty as honorary citizens to make sure they are electing governments that want peace. But if these governments who are hawkish, who keep keeping Palestinians under subjugation, keep getting elected, then obviously they may have to suffer the consequences thereof. And the consequences would be boycotts would affect them as ordinary citizens. Most unfortunate. No one wants ordinary citizens who are minding their business to get affected by some of these decisions. But it's the decision it's a price they have to pay, for having elected people who are crazy, for want of a better word.
Ras, thank you very much for a very insightful conversation. Surely me and my colleagues and the audience and viewers at home, if you have not visited Ghana, we are coming, Ras.
Please come home. I'm going to go closer to the window. There's so much light. So
I can see now. Yes, I can see.
So that is the famous Akosombo Dam. Google it. Okay, it is where Ghana gets our hydroelectricity from. This is one of Kwame Nkrumah's great works. Okay, and it's a sight to behold.
Great. No, thank you so much. We are definitely coming when COVID-19 ends, and surely it will. We are coming to Ghana. Thank you very much. This video will be saved on the videos tab on our Facebook page. It will remain there for those who want to reference later. Thank you very much, Comrade Ras, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Ali, and keep safe. Keep safe. Thank you very much.